Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is raising a glass. A toast at a wedding, a beer after work, a glass of wine with dinner. It feels like a modern ritual, something humans invented along with everything else civilized. But the real answer is far stranger. Your taste for alcohol is not a few thousand years old. It might be older than your own species. You already carry the evidence in your body. Somewhere in your liver right now sits an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, quietly built to break down ethanol. Your body didn't develop that by accident. It developed it because something, a very long time ago, made that skill worth having. So when did ancient humans actually start drinking? Not when you think, not where you think, and definitely not for the reason you think. To find the real beginning, you have to go back further than human, further than agriculture, further than fire, even. You have to go back roughly 10 million years, into the rainforest canopy, long before anything resembling a modern human existed. Picture a forest floor littered with fallen fruit. Ripe fruit doesn't stay ripe. Wild yeast lands on the skin, breaks down the sugar inside, and starts producing a byproduct, ethanol. Alcohol, in other words, is not something humans invented. It's something nature has been quietly leaking out of rotting fruit for tens of millions of years. For a fruit-eating primate, that smell mattered enormously. Ethanol in the air was a signal. It meant ripe, sugar-rich, calorie-dense food was nearby. In a competitive forest where energy was hard to come by, the animals that could smell fermentation from a distance and tolerate the alcohol once they found it had an advantage. They ate first. They ate more. Biologist Robert Dudley, at the University of California, Berkeley, has spent decades studying this exact idea. He calls it the drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument is simple and a little uncomfortable. Your attraction to alcohol isn't a modern weakness. It's an ancient survival tool, inherited from fruit-eating ancestors who needed to find calories before their competitors did. Why does that matter today? Because evolution is slow, and your biology hasn't caught up to your bar menu. The fruit your ancient ancestors were eating contained alcohol concentrations of maybe 1 to 2%. A light beer, by comparison, is closer to 5%. Hard liquor pushes past 40. You inherited a reward system tuned for a faint chemical signal in the wild. You're now feeding it something hundreds of times stronger. That's the instinct. But instinct alone doesn't explain a wine list. It doesn't explain breweries, distilleries, or a wedding toast. For that, you need a second chapter in the story, one that starts not 10 million years ago, but a little over 13,000. In a cave called Raqefet, on Mount Carmel in what is now northern Israel, archaeologists found something remarkable. The site belonged to the Natufian, a group of hunter-gatherers living right at the edge of the agricultural revolution. Not quite farmers yet, but no longer fully nomadic either. Researchers led by Liu, an archaeologist at Stanford, analyzed ancient starch residue left in stone mortars at the site. What they found was beer, not wine, not some accidental fermented puddle, actual, deliberately brewed beer, made by soaking and fermenting wild grains, roughly 13,000 years ago. It is, as far as the evidence currently shows, the oldest known instance of humans intentionally making alcohol. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. This wasn't a casual drink at the end of a long hunt. The beer was found near a burial site. The Natufians weren't just drinking for pleasure. They appear to have been brewing beer specifically for funerals, to honor and feast with their dead. Think about what that means. Before humans had permanent farms, before they had writing, or wheels, or cities, they had already figured out how to deliberately ferment grain into something intoxicating, and they considered it important enough to serve at a funeral. Alcohol wasn't a side effect of civilization. In some very real sense, it may have helped inspire it. And the story doesn't stop there, because something almost identical happened on the other side of the planet completely independently. At a site called Jiahu, in China's Hunan province, archaeologists uncovered pottery dating back roughly 9,000 years. Chemical residue inside told its own story, a fermented mixture of rice, honey, and fruit, a primitive, ancient cocktail brewed thousands of miles from Raqefet cave by people who had no contact with the Natufians whatsoever. Two unconnected groups of ancient humans, separated by thousands of miles and likely thousands of years of cultural development, independently arrived at the same idea. Take something containing sugar, let it ferment, and drink what comes out. That's not a coincidence you can explain with culture. That's an instinct old enough to be written into the species itself, expressing itself wherever humans happen to be standing. There's actually a deeper theory connecting these dots, sometimes called the beer hypothesis. Some archaeologists have proposed that the human desire for a reliable, abundant source of fermentable grain may have been one of the very forces that pushed ancient humans toward agriculture in the first place. Not just hunger for bread, thirst, quite literally, for beer. If that's even partially true, it reframes almost everything you think you know about the rise of civilization. You tend to picture agriculture as humans settling down to grow food, and alcohol as something that came later, a pleasant side benefit of having surplus grain. But the evidence from Raqefet and Jiahu suggests the order might have been reversed, or at least far more tangled than that. Humans may have wanted beer badly enough to start farming in order to get it reliably. So follow the thread all the way through. 10 million years ago, a primate's nose learns to detect alcohol drifting off rotting fruit on a forest floor, because that smell means food. 13,000 years ago, a small community in the hills above what is now Haifa learns to recreate that same chemical on purpose, brews it into beer, and serves it at the graves of their dead. 9,000 years ago, on the opposite side of the planet, an entirely separate group of humans arrives at the same discovery, using rice instead of grain. And tonight, you might pour a glass of wine without a single thought crossing your mind about any of it. That casual moment, the clink of a glass, the half-second pause before the first sip, carries an unbroken thread back through the very first farm, back through the very first funerals, back through millions of years of primates following their noses through a forest that no longer exists. You didn't invent the taste for alcohol. You inherited it, the same way you inherited fear of the dark, or your hunger for fat and sugar. It wrote in your biology long before there was a word for biology, long before there was a word for anything at all. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is raising a glass, completely unaware that the gesture connects them to a chain of ancestors stretching back past agriculture, past fire, past the very first humans, into a rainforest canopy, 10 million years deep, where the smell of something sweet and slightly spoiled once meant the difference between going hungry and eating well. If that changed how you think about your next drink, here's something else hiding in plain sight. What ancient humans actually feared after dark reveals the real, ancient reason your body still reacts the way it does the moment the lights go out. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a dark room the same way again.